Everyone in the room was smiling. The conversation was moving. The drinks were poured. And the person in the corner, the one with the biggest laugh, the loudest joke, the most animated story, felt, to most people in that room, like the most comfortable person there. But one individual sitting across from them felt something entirely different. A tightness, a disconnect they couldn't name. A sense that the room itself had a temperature that didn't match what anyone was saying. They stayed quiet. They didn't say anything, because what could they say? That the air felt wrong, just. That something about the way that person's eyes didn't move when they smiled had set off something deep in their nervous system. No one would have understood, and so the empath went silent and cataloged and waited. And 3 months later, the thing they had sensed that night turned out to be exactly what it was. This is not mysticism. This is not intuition in the vague, untestable sense that the word usually implies. What empaths do, what they actually documentably neurologically do, is something far more specific and far consequential than most people realize. The popular understanding of empaths tends to collapse them into sensitivity, into people who cry at movies and feel things very deeply and need a lot of alone time. And while those things may be true, they are the surface, and the surface is the least interesting part. What sits beneath it is a set of perceptual and neurological processes that operate with a precision most people never develop, because most people's brains are not wired to run them. The 7 things we are going to examine are not personality traits. They are functions. And once you understand what those functions are actually doing, you will not be able to look at empaths or at yourself quite the same way again. The first thing, the temperature of a room that no one else has measured. Walk into a space after a fight has happened. After something has been said and then denied. After a silence that followed an argument that technically ended but didn't actually resolve. Most people walk in and notice nothing. Or they notice something slightly off but attribute it to fatigue, or the lighting, or the fact that it's been a long day. The empath walks in and knows, not suspects, knows. The emotional residue of a conflict doesn't evaporate when people stop speaking. It persists in posture, in the exact millimeter of space between people who are usually closer in. The quality of a laugh that runs 2 seconds too long. In the way someone pours a drink without offering one. Research on sensory processing sensitivity, the neurological framework that underlies what we call empathic experience, documents this with uncomfortable precision. The brains of highly sensitive people show significantly heightened activation in the insula, a region that integrates moment-to-moment knowledge of internal states, bodily position, and external environmental signals. The insula has been described in the neuroimaging literature as the brain's primary organ of social and emotional awareness, the structure most responsible for what we would loosely call reading the room. In highly sensitive individuals, fMRI studies consistently show that this region activates more strongly, processes more quickly, and integrates more incoming data than in individuals who score lower on measures of sensory sensitivity. This is why the empath doesn't experience walking into a tense room as an observation. They experience it as an event. The emotional temperature registers in the body before it reaches the level of conscious analysis. Before they have formulated the thought, something is wrong here, the anterior insula has already processed dozens of subthreshold cues: posture, spacing, vocal quality, the subtle asymmetry between what a face is showing and what the surrounding muscles are actually doing, and sent that integrated signal upward. The thought arrives after the knowing. The knowing arrives first. What most people miss is that this is not a vague sensitivity. It is a precision instrument. It is the difference between scanning a document and reading it line by line. Most people scan. The empath reads every line, including the ones written in margins no one else noticed were there. And here is what makes this strange and consequential in equal measure. The empath who walks into that room and feels the residue of an argument that has technically ended is receiving accurate data that no one else in the room is processing. They are not imagining the tension. The tension is there. It is being broadcast through the exact behavioral channels that the highly sensitive nervous system has been calibrated over time to receive. The question is never whether the signal is real. The question is whether the person receiving it has learned to trust it, or whether they have spent enough time being told they're too sensitive that they've started routing around their own most reliable instrument. The second thing, the gap between what someone says and what their body is not quite agreeing to. There is a phenomenon in the study of facial expression research called a microexpression. It lasts less than half a second. It is the involuntary leak of an emotional state the person is actively trying to suppress. When the amygdala generates a genuine emotional response and the person chooses, consciously or not, to display a different one, the true response surfaces, briefly, completely involuntarily, before the controlled expression takes over. This happens below the threshold of conscious awareness for most observers. They do not see it. They process the displayed expression and form their impression accordingly. Empaths see it, not always consciously. Not always in the form of a thought that says, I noticed a micro-expression there. More often it arrives as a vague sense that something didn't quite add up. That the sadness in the voice didn't match the confidence in the words. That the smile was fractionally too delayed. That the agreement came too smoothly without the micro-resistance that genuine agreement tends to carry. Paul Ekman and Maureen O'Sullivan, in their long-running research on what they called truth wizards, individuals with exceptional accuracy in detecting deception, found that these individuals were not relying on a single dominant cue. They were integrating multiple simultaneous channels, facial movement, vocal tone, body language, and the precise coherence or incoherence between them. They were, in essence, looking for inconsistency between systems rather than deception in any single one. The empath's relationship with this kind of inconsistency is not chosen. It is structural. Research on emotional intelligence and deception detection shows that individuals with higher affective empathy demonstrate significantly better accuracy at identifying mismatches between facial and verbal cues. Specifically, the kind of mismatch that arises when what someone is displaying emotionally does not match what their autonomic nervous system is actually producing. The empath notices the mismatch before they can name it. This is why empaths often feel uncomfortable around certain people without being able to explain why. The person is charming. The person says all the right things. Everyone else is delighted. But something in the empath's perceptual system has registered an inconsistencies between the display and the underlying signal and has flagged it as a discrepancy that the conscious mind has not yet caught up to. They feel, in the presence of certain people, a kind of friction that has no visible source. The friction is real. The source is the gap between the mask and what the mask is covering. The third thing, pain in bodies other than their own. This one is the most unsettling of the seven and also the most extensively documented at the neurological level. When an empath observes someone in physical pain, watches them wince, hears the intake of breath, sees the tension move across their face, something happens in the empath's body that is not metaphorical. It is literal. The same neural regions that process the direct experience of pain, the anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula, act activate in response to the witness pain of another. This is the mechanism behind what neuroscientists call embodied simulation. The brain's method of understanding another person's physical or emotional state by simulating it internally, as though the observer were undergoing the same experience. In individuals with heightened empathic response, the mirror neuron system that underlies the simulation process activates more intensely, more thoroughly, and across a wider range of stimuli. The empath who feels a headache come on during a conversation with someone who is silently suffering one is not being dramatic. Their sensorimotor system has registered the other person's physical state and produced a corresponding, if attenuated, physical response in themselves. The brain does not distinguish cleanly between the simulation of pain and the experience of it. The threshold is just lower for some people than for others. What this creates in the daily life of someone with a highly sensitive nervous system is an environment that is physically relentless in a way that is invisible to everyone around them. A crowded room is not merely socially taxing. It is a room full of dozens of ongoing simulations running simultaneously, each person's emotional and physical state being mirrored, integrated, and felt, however briefly, in the observer's own body. Research on sensory processing sensitivity and overstimulation consistently documents a finding that should surprise no one once the mechanism is clear. Highly sensitive individuals reach neurological saturation much faster than others, not because they are less resilient, but because they are processing significantly more. The brain that reads everything in a room requires more recovery time than the brain that skims the headline. And what most people never much understand is that the exhaustion empaths carry after intense social situations is not emotional weakness. It is computational cost. They have been running a more complex and more demanding perceptual operation than everyone else in the same room. The drain is proportional to the work. The fourth thing, the shift that happened before the conversation that will end everything. Relationships don't end on the day they end. By the time the conversation happens, the one that finalizes it, the one that says what everyone already knows, the relationship has been over for some time. The process is slower than the moment. And the thing about that slower process is that it is full of signals, behavioral signals, relational signals, the kind of microscopic changes in responsiveness and presence and warmth that accumulate quietly until they are undeniable. Most people don't notice them until they have already accumulated. The empath noticed the first one. It begins with something in the texture of the exchange. The response time that was once immediate becomes slightly longer. The quality of attention becomes fractionally thinner, still there, still present in form, but with a different quality beneath the surface. The laugh that was once unself-conscious has become more controlled. The questions that were once curious have become perfunctory. None of these changes are visible in isolation. Each one alone could be explained as fatigue or a busy week or stress. But the empath is not evaluating them in isolation. They are tracking them across time, integrating a pattern that the conscious mind has not yet named, and arriving at a conclusion that will not be validated publicly until months later. The research on emotional disconnection in relationships documents the progression this pattern follows, and the empath's perceptual system is calibrated to detect exactly this kind of progression. The slow narrowing of emotional availability, what researchers describe as the gradual movement from vulnerability to guardedness in relational communication, produces behavioral markers that are accessible to anyone who is looking closely enough to see them. The empath looks that closely, not as a choice, but as a consequence of the same depth of processing that made every other item on this list possible. What they do with what they see is a different question. The knowing comes before the conversation. It comes before the confirmation. And there is a particular kind of loneliness in that. In having a clear perception of something that the people around you are not yet ready to acknowledge, and having no language to offer them that would not sound like accusation or insecurity or projection. The empath does not say what they know. They wait. And when the moment arrives, the one that everyone else experiences as a shock, the empath experiences as a completion, not a surprise, a confirmation. The fifth thing, the need beneath the request. When someone says, "I'm fine," the empath hears something else. Not because they distrust the words, though sometimes that too, but because the words arrive accompanied by an enormous quantity of other information that contradicts them or qualifies them or complicates them in ways the speaker may not even be aware of. The posture that doesn't match the claim. The slight quickening in the voice that surfaces when a particular subject is mentioned. The way the eye contact becomes slightly too sustained, as though the person is working harder than usual to project something that should be effortless. The depth of processing that characterizes sensory processing sensitivity operates identically in social situations. The empath is not simply hearing the words. They are receiving and integrating a full spectrum signal, verbal content, vocal quality, facial expression, body language, and the precise relationship between all of these. And the conclusion they arrive at is based on all of it simultaneously, not just the part that was meant to be communicated. This is why empaths frequently feel they know what someone needs before that person is asked. Because the need is being transmitted. Just not through the channel the person thought they were using. This creates a particular dynamic in relationships with empaths that is worth naming precisely. Sussed. The people around them often feel seen in ways they find simultaneously comforting and unnerving. Comforting, because to be genuinely perceived, not just heard, but actually understood, is a rare experience and one that most people hunger for without knowing quite what they're hungry for. Unnerving. Because the empath is picking up on things that the person didn't consciously choose to share. Things they perhaps didn't know they were broadcasting. The internal experience that was not offered as information, but was absorbed as information anyway. The people who take from empaths without reciprocation are, almost without exception, people who have learned, consciously or not, that need can be communicated through presence rather than request. That the empath will notice, that the empath will respond. This is not station in any simple sense. But it is a pattern, and it is one the empath's perceptual system is structurally inclined to enable until they learn to choose which signals they respond to rather than letting the responding happen automatically. The sixth thing. The moment authenticity leaves the room. Most people experience the social world primarily through what people say. The empath experiences it through what people mean, and the gap between the two is where they spend most of their social energy, processing the distance between the official version of a conversation and the version that is actually happening beneath it. This gap appears most clearly in group settings, where the social pressure to perform cohesion is highest, and where the distance between what is being said and what is actually being felt tends to be greatest. The empath in a meeting, in a family gathering, in a dinner party is doing something the other attendees are not. They are reading a parallel text, the unspoken agreement beneath the spoken one, the hierarchy being performed beneath the stated equality, the anger that is being laundered through jokes, the withdrawal that is being masked through overparticipation. These are not impressions. They are pattern recognitions running continuously updating against new data as the interaction develops. The temporoparietal junction, a brain region implicated in theory of mind, in the assessment of false beliefs, and in the detection of incongruity between stated and actual mental states, shows heightened activation in individuals with strong empathic response. The brain is specifically equipped to register the gap between what someone says they think and what they actually think. In the empath, that equipment is running at higher resolution. What this produces is a social experience that is structurally much more complex than the one most people are having. Most people are navigating the surface. The empath is navigating the surface and everything beneath it simultaneously. And because they cannot easily explain what they are doing, because I notice the agenda beneath the agenda is not a sentence that lands well in most social contexts. They often carry the knowledge alone, unable to share it without seeming either paranoid or presumptuous. There is a particular behavioral pattern that emerges from this. The empath who has learned through repeated experience that sharing what they perceive about a social situation tends to produce discomfort, confusion, or conflict, eventually stops sharing. They become quieter in groups than their inner experience would warrant. They develop a public version of themselves that is carefully calibrated to offer just enough to connect without revealing the full depth of what they are observing. This is not dishonesty. It is adaptation. The transformation of a very complex perceptual experience into a form that the social environment can receive. The seventh thing, the world pressing in too hard. A crowded room is not experienced by everyone the same way. For some people, density of social input is neutral, processable background, something the nervous system categorizes and files without significant cognitive cost. For the empath, density of social input is not background, it is foreground. It is foreground that demands continuous processing, that accumulates through the course of a conversation, a dinner, an event, and that leaves the nervous system not merely tired but genuinely depleted in a way that requires not rest but solitude. Specifically, the kind of solitude that removes social input entirely, so that the processing can decelerate and the system can return to baseline. This is why brights are not just bright to the empath, why loud restaurants are not just loud, why a complex day at work with too many conversations and too many personalities leaves them feeling not just mentally drained, but physically flattened in a way that seems disproportionate to what occurred. The research on sensory processing sensitivity and overstimulation documents this consistently. The same brain structures that produce enhanced social and emotional perception. The insula, the mirror neuron system, the areas associated with depth of processing and emotional integration, also produce faster saturation. The organ that is most capable of reading the environment is the same organ that is most exhausted by it. Studies on highly sensitive individuals and nature exposure have found a particularly pronounced recovery effect. Specifically, that natural environments with their non-social complexity, their sounds and textures and patterns that engage involuntary attention without demanding social interpretation, produce measurably stronger restoration in individuals with high sensory processing sensitivity than in those without it. The reason is legible once the mechanism is visible. A forest does not have an agenda. A coastline is not performing anything. The complexity of the natural world is real complexity, not social complexity, and the empath's nervous system, which has been running social interpretation software at full capacity through every human interaction of the day, can finally let the most expensive process idle. This is why empaths' return from time in natural environments changed in a way that isn't simply explained by fresh air or aesthetic pleasure. Their most demanding cognitive and neurological process has been given permission to rest. Not because they chose to stop thinking, but because the environment stopped requiring a kind of thinking that can't be switched off by will alone. Nature doesn't ask them to read it, it just is. And for a nervous system that has been reading everything relentlessly since the moment it entered a social environment, that is not a preference. It is a necessity. Now hold what all 7 of these actually amount to when you place them side by side. The empath who senses the temperature of a room before anyone has spoken. Who notices the gap between the displayed emotion and the one being suppressed. Who feels physical discomfort during someone else's physical pain. Who perceives the erosion of a relationship long before it has been named. Who understands the need beneath the stated request. Who reads the agenda beneath the agenda in every group they enter. Who moves through social environments as though every interaction is a complex, full-spectrum data event. This is not a personality type in the casual sense. This is a specific neurological profile, one that Elaine Aron and her colleagues first formally described in the 1990s under the framework of sensory processing sensitivity, and one that subsequent fMRI research has now located in specific brain regions, specific patterns of activation, and specific structural differences in white matter that can be identified and measured. Approximately 15 to 20% of the human population carries this trait. It has been documented across more than 100 species, which suggests it is not an anomaly. It is a strategy. Evolutionary biology consistently finds traits that have persisted across species for long periods to carry adaptive function, and the function of a nervous system that is calibrated to detect subtle changes in social environments, to notice the inconsistency before it becomes a crisis, to read the room before the room declares itself, is not difficult to identify. The individual who perceives the threat that has not yet revealed itself has always been valuable to the group. What has not always been understood is the cost that accompanies the capacity. Most of the scientific and clinical work on highly sensitive people focuses reasonably on the benefits and the challenges of the trait in contemporary life. The benefits are significant. Empaths tend to form deeper bonds, perceive unspoken needs more accurately, and navigate complex social dynamics with a sophistication that is difficult to teach and impossible to fake. The challenges are equally significant, and they cluster around the same mechanism that produces the strengths. Thence, the nervous system that reads everything cannot be selectively told to stop. The insula that integrates every signal from every person in the room cannot be asked to process only the comfortable ones. The mirror neuron system that simulates others' physical and emotional experience cannot be switched into a lower resolution mode when the experience being simulated is one the empath would prefer not to feel. This is the paradox at the center of the empath's experience. Their greatest capability and their greatest vulnerability share the same structural origin. The instruments that makes them extraordinary at perceiving the world is the same instrument that makes the world so exhausting to inhabit. And this means that the choices empaths make about who they spend time with, which environments they enter, which social commitments they take on, and which relationships they remain in, these are not merely lifestyle preferences. They are neurological decisions. Every chronic relationship with someone who demands emotional labor without providing reciprocal care is a sustained draw on a system that is already running at capacity. Every social environment that provides no restoration point is a system running without the opportunity to return to baseline. Over time, these decisions accumulate in the body in ways that other people's social decisions simply do not. What the empath notices then is not just the truth about others. It is the operational cost of living in a world that was not built with their specific perceptual capacity in mind. A world in which the common advice is to stop overthinking, but there is no overthinking here, only deep processing that cannot be voluntarily suspended. A world in which the common observation is, you're too sensitive, but the sensitivity is not excessive relative to what is actually being perceived. It is proportional. The sensitivity matches the signal. The world is just producing more signal than most people receive. This is what empaths know about themselves that they are rarely given language for. Not that they feel things more than other people, that they perceive more than other people, that what they are responding to emotionally is real data, processed at a depth and with a resolution that most people do not have access to, and experienced, therefore, as feeling rather than as cognition, because the brain that runs the processing has learned that no one will accept the data if it is offered as information rather than as intuition. The silence that descends on empaths in social settings is not shyness. The fatigue that follows crowded rooms is not weakness. It's just. The discomfort in the presence of certain people who charm everyone else is not irrationality. These are the correct outputs of a nervous system that is functioning exactly as designed. A system that is receiving, integrating, and accurately reporting on a world that most people are only partially reading. The 7 things on this list are not secrets. They are not mystical. They are the observable behavioral consequences of a neurological profile that has been identified, studied, and documented across decades of peer-reviewed research. What remains rare is not the empaths themselves. 15 to 20% of the population is not a small number. What remains rare is the accurate understanding of what is actually happening inside them. The understanding that what looks like sensitivity is actually precision. That what looks like emotional reactivity is actually perceptual accuracy. That what looks like being overwhelmed is actually what happens when a high-resolution instrument is asked to process an environment at full capacity without rest in a world that has not learned how to slow down for it. The person in that room at the beginning of this, the one who felt the temperature others couldn't measure, was not imagining it. The room was exactly what they said it was. It was the room that had the wrong reading, not them. Once you understand that, the question worth sitting with is not what is wrong with empaths. It is what they've quietly, accurately noticing while everyone else was busy having the official version of events. If that question has opened something you want to follow further, the next video examines what happens when an empath finally stops absorbing and starts deciding the specific shift in behavior, in relationship pattern, and in neurologic response that follows when the system that has been giving everything finally chooses what it gives to. That shift is worth understanding before you see it happen or before you realize it already has.